Hey, what's going on, RCC fam? Pastor T here. Beautiful Wednesday afternoon, early evening, if you will. And I wanted to get a little midweek teaching out. I thought, with our new series that we have going on, the I Love My Church series, it might be nice midweek to do a little deeper dive into the concepts and the things that we talk about on Sunday morning. When we have that hour together in worship and teaching of the word, it's important to kind of be able to go back and revisit it and go a little bit deeper into what it is we're really trying to establish. I think that it's very important this year that we make sure that we proceed on purpose and intentional. And I think part of that is also going to be learning how to dive in a little bit deeper, and what a better way to do it than with some of the stuff that we talked about on Sunday. So I'm going to be doing a little midweek teaching here. I'm going to try not to keep you too long, so you won't be sitting there for forever and ever and ever, but expect to spend about 15 or 20 minutes. There's some questions, some things for reflection. We have this divided into a couple little sections, some introduction, where we'll go over the scripture again, maybe breaking it down a little bit more in depthly, or revisiting some of the ideas that we talked about on Sunday. We want to have a thinking it through section. So this is where we start to ask some reflective questions. And then we're going to ask, how does that apply to me? Because if we can't draw the parallels and look at it and see ourselves in the text, or how the text applies to us, then we're going to miss it. And then ultimately, the big question, or the big takeaway, is now what? So now that I have this information, now that I have this insight or revelation, what do I do with it? So this is what we're going to be doing today. And, last year taught us a lot of really cool and interesting things. And one of them was that technology really allows us to connect and do some things in a most unique way. So we're going to be using some technology here for us to follow along with. We're going to do it in a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation. You'll see me up in the corner of the screen, and I'll kind of be teaching, but you'll be able to follow along and watch some things on the screen. We're also going to include a PDF downloadable document that you'll be able to print off, and it will have everything that we went over in the PowerPoint. But if maybe you're one of those people that would like to print it off for yourself and then just deeper reflection on your own, or we would encourage you, even with some friends, if you get together, one or two or three or four of you, however many you feel comfortable with in this kind of COVID situation, we want you to do that. And it's good to have some people to bounce some things off of and talk some things through with that way. So it's going to be on our website. We're going to have it on YouTube, as well as on Facebook. So depending on how you like to interact with Medium, you'll be able to access everything in any of those mediums. So we're going to kind of dive in here and explore, kind of this week one idea of, what does loving the church really look like? So I'm going to kind of go into some technology here. We're going to kind of get set up. I'm going to do what's called a screen share. So I'm going to pull some stuff off my computer, and then we're going to be able to look at this, all together, and be able to, just kind of to work through it together. So, the series that we're in right now is called I Love My Church, of course. And really the idea, the fundamental application is we want to build a stronger church through community service, giving, and sharing. And we started off this first week, we called it You're Invited, because what we really want to do is invite everyone into this love relationship with us and Jesus Christ. The vision for the church is to connect with one another and the transformational love and person of Jesus Christ. So this first week, we thought what we really want to do is we want to get this foundational component down, and that's love. We want to talk about what it is, what it looks like in practicality and in practice, so that we can go forth well. So we're going to look at a couple different ideas here, talking about, hey, I love my church. So the first little thing that we want to look at week one is, our church has never really been about a building or a location. And I think fundamentally, one of the areas that kind of gets us caught when we really start thinking about the church is we think about it like a location. But, as we talked about on Sunday, first and foremost, the ecclesia, the called out ones, it was never about a location or a place. It was about people. So when we think about church, it's more than the building that we have. It's more than the place that we come to get together to sing songs or listen to a message. It's about us, one another. And that's really important as we go forth in this idea of love, because as we talked about on Sunday, it's really all about relationship. And I think that that's important that we understand it, because the fundamental question, or the question on the floor from that perspective, is what does it look like to the community? And I'm going to say outside of us, outside of the body, and specifically our body, RCC, what does it look like outside of our body to the neighboring community when we love each other in the way that Jesus talks about? Because, even Jesus said that there's going to be something so distinct about the way that we love that people are going to kind of sit up and take notice of that. So, a question for reflection as we kind of jump into this is what will it look like to the community around us when we love each other in this unique way, this way that Jesus talks about loving one another? And so thinking it through, we call this section Thinking It Through. And a few weeks back in December, I think it was December 20th, Dr. Day taught, and it was a phenomenal teaching, but he referenced this idea, this concept of thinking it through. And I wanted to kind of borrow on that because I think that it really speaks to what we want to do here. So if we kind of think this thing through, and we're going to kind of look at that scripture again that we used on Sunday. So John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35, Jesus is speaking, to disciples. He's speaking to the guys that kind of were hanging with him. And I want to point out this, maybe we didn't touch on it. Jesus is saying this to them at a most unique time. He's getting ready. He's preparing to go to the cross. And in that preparation, he wants to kind of leave them with some ideas that are going to serve them in his physical absence. We know the Holy Spirit's going to come, but in Jesus's physical absence, he wants them to have something really significant that's going to set them apart and set them up for future success. So Jesus says this in John's Gospel, chapter 13, verse 34. He says, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another." And we talked on Sunday, this idea of commandment, this new commandment. And we know that it's really not a new commandment in that this commandment came out of the Old Testament, but the way that Jesus was demonstrating it, it was going to be new in its effect and application, because now he was on the scene. So there was no more guesswork. He says, there's a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. So the idea of commandment, and we talked about it, if we pull some of our modern language out of it, I said one of the words that came up was an injunction or a judicial order to stop or to start something. And Jesus says here's where I want you to start. I want you to love one another, even as I have loved you. And we talked about that, how that is put together, even as, in the way that, in the same manner that I have loved you, because he didn't want to leave it up to chance. And, again, the world says love to so many things, but Jesus says, no, this love is going to be unique, because this was God's love. It was agape. It was compassionately and righteously seeking the best of another. And he said, so I'm going to demonstrate, I'm going to model for you how this love should look. So my commandment, my order to you, not a request, not if you feel like it, but this is what you're to do. You're to love one another in the same way that I loved you. And how did Jesus love? He loved sacrificially. He loved so much that he went to the cross for all of us. He says, in that manner, love one another. And then he points to this, and he says, by this, all men will know. They will come to experience. They will see, because they have their interpretation of love. They have their way of thinking about love. But the way that I'm commanding you to love is going to be distinctly different. And through that experience, how they see you love each other, because that's important. How we love each other. The people that we are in the muck and the mess with, the people that we're bumping up against all the time. He says, when they see how you love under those circumstances, those people, all men will come to experience that you are my disciples, my followers, my learned ones. Because he understood that some people may not want to do this, because loving this way is hard. He says, if you have love for one another, this kind of love, this compassionately, righteously seeking love that is looking out for the best of another person, he says, all men will see that, and they will come to know, they will come to experience that you are my disciples. Because remember, the ecclesia was founded upon this idea that Jesus Christ was the anointed one. He was the Messiah. So as his representatives in the earth, we should be pointing back to the one who came and demonstrated this love for us. He says, so if you have this love, people will say, oh, those are Jesus followers right there. So as we kind of think this thing through, a couple questions for reflection. Who is Jesus actually speaking to here? And in the context of the text, he is speaking to his disciples. He says that right in verse 35. He says, by all this, all men will know that you are my disciples. So he's speaking to disciples. Now, what does that have to do with us? If we say that we are Jesus followers, if we say we are disciples of Jesus, then he's also speaking to us. So that's who Jesus is speaking to. So when we read this, we have to say, man, where do I see me in this? How am I connecting also to the words of Jesus? And what is significant about this new command? I mean, what's its impact? And the impact, if you really think about it, there's a deep significance, not only for the world, but for each of us. When we do this, when we love this way, we experience love this way. So the idea that we're going to love in this God-type way, this way, we're going to experience love this way, right? So that's the significance of this new command, because this was going to be something that was going to be so unique in the world that it was going to set his followers apart. And what is the impact of loving one another? What do you guys think? I'll give you a moment to think about it. What is the impact of loving one another? I mean, we get to experience something most unique. If we think about, Jesus leaving majesty, leaving glory to come and demonstrate this kind of love, it really speaks to how valuable we all are, how valuable God sees all of us. So when we experience that love, I saw a saying that says, without God, man cannot, and without man, God will not, right? And the idea is that he has set up this system so that we experience his love through one another. So when we love each other in this way, we're actually touching people, one another, with the love of God. And, with that in mind, maybe think back and reflect on a time when someone extended unexpected kindness to you. Remember how that made you feel when you looked at something and maybe you'd done something that had wronged someone and you knew it, but even in the midst of that, they reached out and they extended a kindness to you that was unexplainable. Remember how that felt? Because when we boil it all down, that's what God has done through his son, Jesus Christ. He's extended to us an unexpected kindness. And when we sit with that one, it should really, touch us, and we're going through this together. But what I would really encourage you to do is print off that PDF and actually sit with some of these questions a little bit deeper, a little bit longer. Maybe journal and write down, the emotions when somebody actually went above and beyond in their kindness towards you. And then I want you to think, what kinds of gestures show love? How can we communicate love for one another? You guys have all heard me talk about, my grandmother, and I said, I don't remember her using just the verbal expression, I love you, a lot. But there was absolutely no question that she loved us because of everything that she did in her life, how she demonstrated it, how she served us, she loved on us, she cooked for us, she cleaned, she took us places. She was always, really introducing God to us, in the flesh through her. So think on that one. What kinds of gestures show love to our family, to our friends, to our neighbors, to complete strangers? How can we show love in those types of relational situations? And how would you characterize most of your church relationships? If you sat down and really thought it through, the people in our local body, how would you categorize those friendships? Do you see most of the people in church as family? Do you see most of the people in church as friends? Do you see most of the people in church as acquaintances? Or do you see most of the people in church as strangers? Because how we see one another will have an impact or an effect on how we go forward loving one another. Now, even though, all of those categories are different, our mandate is still this, that we love each other the way that Jesus did, compassionately and righteously, seeking the best of one another. But how do I do that with a stranger? How do I do that with family? How do I do that with a friend? How do I do that with an acquaintance? So, think about your relationships, your church relationships. And if you sit down and you go, hey, I think most of my relationships at church are strangers, maybe it's time to do something about that. What do you think? All right. And what do you think prevents us from expressing love in the church? I was talking to Nicole the other day, and she likes this little story that I have, and I think I've used it before. Some of you have heard me use it. I say, if you've got a cup of coffee, if that's your favorite drink, if coffee's not your favorite drink, then go ahead and insert whatever your favorite drink is in there. But if you have a cup full of your favorite drink, I'm going to use coffee in this example, and you're carrying that cup of coffee and somebody bumps into you and you spill your coffee, I would ask, why did you spill your coffee? Now, the initial kind of thought process is the reason I spilled my coffee was because someone bumped into me. Well, I would say that's partly true. But the real reason that you spill coffee is because that's what was in your cup, right? So if you have coffee in your cup and someone bumps into you, you won't miraculously spill milk. So whatever's in you is what's going to come out when you get bumped. And when we think about, church, I think about some of the things that may prevent us from expressing love. It could be past hurts, past disappointments, holding on to some things that keep us from doing that. Maybe we're going to church, maybe out of a sense of moral obligation, or this is tradition, but I'm disconnected because I have this memory, or I just don't feel comfortable, or I don't know anybody. Everybody's a stranger to me. So, what sorts of things are preventing you from expressing love in the church? And here's a question. What effect, if any, does a congregation's behavior have on those outside the church? Going back to verse 35 of John 13, Jesus says, if we love each other in the manner that he has set forth, he says they'll know that we're his disciples. And I would think, the converse, although it's not said, is probably also true. If we don't demonstrate that love, but yet call ourselves disciples, what is the message that those outside the church are getting about the church and about the one who the church is founded upon? So we have a massive responsibility as Jesus followers, as those who say, hey, we trust in the Lord. We have a massive responsibility on our God's reputation, on his reputation, how others think about him based on what they see from us. And we talk about it, and listen, I get it. Loving one another is risky. Why? Because people may not love you back. Or worse, they may take your love, your desire to compassionately and righteously seek their best, and they may misuse that, or they may abuse that. And for a lot of us, that's the thing that keeps us from loving. We tried that before. We went forward. We attempted to love, and it didn't turn out so good. So we say, you know what? I'm going to play it safe. But Jesus didn't ask us to play it safe. That's not what he called us to do. He said, I'm calling you to love one another. And in the body, if we are all saying, hey, I'm a Jesus follower, and you're saying you're a Jesus follower, then we have a command to take care of each other in a loving way. But I get it. It's a risky deal. So here's kind of the big question. How does this apply to me? Because, when we're together on Sunday, we're listening to this message collectively. But the real question is, how does this apply to me? How do I go forward in this? Because ultimately, the only person that we can ultimately affect change with and be responsible for is ourselves. So how does this apply to me? So I'm going to ask a pretty big question, and I would really ask that you all wrestle with this one just a little bit. What is my biggest obstacle personally to overcome in order to show love to the people in this church? If you call RCC your home, and even if you're watching this because somebody said, hey, check this out, and maybe RCC is not your home, maybe it's another body, or you're looking for a body, whatever. The question is that sometimes we have stuff that prevent us from doing the stuff that we need to do. So the question really on the floor is, what's your biggest obstacle? What's my biggest obstacle personally that we need to overcome in order to show love to the people in our local body? Do we need to forgive? Do we need to quit taking it so personal? Do we need to let go of offense? Do we need to trust? Do we need to forget old records that are playing? What do we need to do? For some of us, we just need to get involved. We just need to engage to be able to do that. Because remember, last week we talked about We said love is intentional. We get better at loving as we practice being loving people. So I want you to wrestle with this one a little bit. I want you to kind of look at this. What is my biggest obstacle? What is it that maybe if, because God knows, be honest with yourself because he already knows what's holding you back. Ask yourself, what's holding me back? And then, now what? I've answered this question. Now what? Now what do I do with it? And I would say this, I would submit this to you. Go before the Lord in prayer and say, Lord, I don't want to live just on the periphery. I want to jump into the deep end of the pool. I want to be one of those people that those outside look at and they go, you know what? That's a Jesus follower right there. On Sunday, we said, we talked about real money. How many of us want the world to look and say, you know what? That's real money. So now what? And I would encourage you to go before the Lord and pray and maybe, ask him to lay someone specifically on your heart that you can actually start to practice showing love to. I probably have shared before, I remember being in another body and there was someone that I absolutely struggled with. And I remember going to the Lord and in prayer and saying, show me how to actually love this person, how to really be a good brother to this person. And I prayed for them every single day. And I don't remember how many days straight, or I think it was more than a month or 2 months. I remember just praying for this person. And sometimes it started, really simple, like, Lord, just bless them, because I didn't know much about them and I was still stuck, And I remember the day that I walked in and there was something that was different. And here's what I'm going to tell you. I don't really know how much was really different about them. I can tell you there was tons different about me. So I encourage you, go before the Lord and say, Lord, help me flesh this one out. I want you to craft the situation, the opportunity where I get to show love the way that Jesus talks about showing love. Before we go, I want to share something with you that I hope can give you a little extra depth, and it actually comes from 1 John. So the guy that wrote the Gospel of John, he also wrote this one, and I think it's actually kind of unique because John refers to himself, or is referred to as, the disciple that Jesus loved. So John writes a lot about love. And in 1 John chapter 4, I'm going to read a couple of verses that I'd like for you to kind of take with you as you mull over this teaching and as we just continue to go forward. In 1 John 4, verse number 7. So 1 John chapter 4, starting in verse 7, we read these words. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Jesus said it, the defining characteristic of those who follow him is that they are people that will be marked with love. When someone bumps into you, what's going to come out of your cup? Love's going to come out of your cup. Verse 8, the one who does not love does not know God, for God is love. If we say, hey, we love God, but we don't love the people around us, I would say we probably need to check that one a little deeper, right? Because God would say, I think you're missing something there. Verse 9, by this, the love of God was manifested in us. And that word manifested means rendered apparent. Here's how God made it apparent. By this, the love of God was rendered apparent in us, that God has sent his only begotten Son into the world so that we might live through him. He gave us the model. Jesus demonstrated it all the way to the cross. And he says, this is how we know love, because God sent his son to make sure we did not miss it. In this is love, not that we love God, but that he loved us and sent his son to be the propitiation for our sins. He said that there was something that was going to keep you out of relationship, your sin. And he says, I loved you too much to let that happen. So I gave a solution. And in verse 11, beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. And that one, you got to catch it. It's not a question. It's not if, it's since. Beloved, since God so loved us, this is what he did. He sent his son. We also ought to love one another. So what we want to do over the next couple weeks in this I Love My Church series is we want to take Sunday and we actually want to drive it down deeper and have these little studies. And I would encourage you, watch this, print off the PDF, spend some time in prayer, answer the questions, really go through them, spend some time with the Lord and answer those questions. I really believe that as we engage God in this process, he is going to work with us so we don't miss it. I absolutely love being your pastor. I love you guys. I am so thankful that God saw fit to knit us together for such a time as this. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday evening, and I look forward to seeing you in church. Until we meet again, I love you. Go love one another. Until we meet again. Later.